Thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine Bayliss. This is a two-part Zoom event of 20th century American prose and poetry in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Today's session is From Cats to Seagulls, a Bayliss Bestiary. The subject of today's readings is animals in Jonathan Bayliss's fiction series, Gloucesterman. Tomorrow's session, which will begin at the same time, is Gloucester Quintet, 5 writers, 5 friends. Be sure to tune in 10 to 15 minutes early for a slideshow of photographs of Gloucester and the 5 friends. Peter Anastas, Jonathan Bayliss, Vincent Farini, Garrett Lansing, and Charles Olson. The 5 writers became friends in the late 1950s, early 1960s in this East Coast seaport on the Atlantic Ocean. These sessions are sponsored by the Cape Ann Museum, the Gloucester Writers Center, and the Jonathan Bayliss Society. Liz Sibley Fletcher will be our moderator today, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. She has a BFA in ceramics from Massachusetts College of Art. She's a potter and sculptor. She's concerned about the human impacts on the environment, and she obtained a master's degree in resource management from Antioch, New England. For 10 years, she was Greenway coordinator of the Nashua River Watershed Association. Liz serves on her town's Conservation Commission, which works to protect land, water, and wildlife habitat. Welcome, Liz, and please take over.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now begins the Bayliss Bestiary, animal-centered writings from Jonathan Bayliss's prodigious series of Gloucesterman novels, read to us by 6 interesting characters from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean and from across the North American continent, even out to California. We expect the readings to take a little less than an hour. An optional question and answer session will follow the readings. You may type questions using the Q&A button in Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. This session is being recorded. Attendees are muted and will not be in the video. Our first 3 readers are Mark Kurlansky, Marcella Henderson Peel, and George Angel. They all read from Bayliss's novel Prologus, which takes place in the Bay Area of California. Our first reader is Mark Kurlansky in New York City. Mark is the author of more than 30 books, including bestsellers Cod, a biography of the fish that changed the world, and The Last Fish Tale, the fate of the Atlantic and survival in Gloucester, America's oldest fishing port and most original town. Well, Mark was born in Hartford, Connecticut, received a BA in theater from Butler University, and he's been a playwright, commercial fisherman, dock worker, paralegal, pastry chef, foreign correspondent, and guest lecturer, among other things. His work has received numerous awards, including for children's books and science writing. Recent books include City Beasts, 14 short stories of uninvited wildlife, and for young readers, Frozen in Time, Clarence Birdseye's outrageous idea about frozen food. Mark has spent more than 30 years traveling the world writing about food, culture, and history. A resident of New York City, he spent considerable time in Gloucester, where he serves on the advisory board of the Gloucester Writers Center. Mark, please join us and take it away with Seagulls.
Okay, thank you. The first thing I'm going to read is from a Prologus chapter called Pony Rides, and it's the Chapman family at San Francisco Zoo. And these are Michael Chapman's thoughts. The original Ark was just a big box shaped like Ishmael's life preserver. No need for seabirds to be saved, but What did they eat for 40 days and 40 nights with no beaches or mussels or fish curry? They were passions torn from the breast of Adam, according to Yeats, like each of the other species. Which passion? Freedom. They're pretty tough and fearless looking here. What kind of herring gulls are California gulls? Be funny if one of them has seen Gloucester by way of northern Canada, or by the Missouri to the Snake and the Columbia, or by the Panama Canal. I doubt that the ornithologists could prove anything, but they just don't seem the same kind here. Look at that crippled bruiser with the folded foot. All the others are swooping and busy picking up garbage, but he just stares off westward into space, probably not 20 feet from us. If he's not interested in the hurly-burly, why does he stay here at all? He should be standing on a tower of the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, the second thing I'm going to read from Gloucestermas is the character Faye Gabriel is talking with her godson, Caleb Carsus, on a walk near Good Harbor Beach. I don't know where my lone-ranging blackback Maxwell does her socializing, but right now, most of the Raucous Gull Federation is probably darkening the sky over the state fish pier while some boats are unloading, shrieking and squabbling at the densely populated center of what you call a microtropopolis, within 3 blocks of where you're so busy abstracting symbols for a common good in the center of things. Look at the very foot of that eelgrass ridge of sand. I've seen a Cosmo angel dart down through a canopy of close-packed family paraphernalia to snatch half a roll of mustard and relish hot dog already fingered on the way to the mouth of a little boy from his paper plate to a flapping vortex of aerial competition. I didn't think the gull had path enough through the bunched sunshades and crowded parents to open his wings, but it came and went before the boy's amazement could turn into a howl. I didn't stop squeezing my passage that happened to be through that cluster until the enraged parents and grandparents couldn't see my laugh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, very much. That Good Harbor Beach scene is really true to life, and those gulls are still at it. Our next reader is Marcella Henderson Peel, across the Atlantic Ocean in Paris. And Marcella teaches soft skills in English at Paris University and is vice dean of a college there. Born in France to British parents, Marcella is married with 2 grown-up daughters, and she lives in Paris. She belongs to the Powys Society and worked on a PhD thesis on John Cowper Powys' philosophical reception in France. She sometimes writes poetry in English and French, as well as articles on Powys' works. Some of her poems have been read on London's Radio Resonance, and several have appeared in e-zines, such as Watching the Wheels, a Blackbird, in Words and Myth. She finds Jonathan Bayliss a new and exciting discovery. Marcella, please tell us all about the lions.
Yes. So this is an excerpt from Cat House, a chapter called Cat House in Prologus. Michael Chapman is visiting the cat house of the San Francisco Zoo with his wife and 3 young sons, and Jonathan is the oldest of the 3. Jonathan's interest in lions was limited to the tall kings of the race, with a noble proportion for forequarters to rakish hindquarters, with their special contribution to the ideal which as a whole they suffered by comparison to. Catalogued in his mind's bestiary was a lion-size hybrid from India, Africa, and America. A mountain climbing, ocean diving, yardarm walking, wall leaping, road speeding, night watching, day purring bodyguard and traveling companion, politer than a collie in gentle society, and keener than a bloodhound in trailing the lost or the fleeing, his young master's best friend. but something more shapely than the high-hipped African female was required in the pedigree. Something of the burning bright tiger's length, perhaps Siberian, for sinuous lines and independent power. And next comes another excerpt from the following page. No wonder Michael Chapman asked himself what made them keep living, putting himself in their miserable particle of space where he couldn't look behind them or to either side, and looked out in front only to face scot-free enemies jeering at his loss. He could not accept the prevailing assurance that even such godlike freethinkers suffered less than human beings in a dungeon. He wasn't convinced by the putative fact that animals were inferior in nervous complexity and self-consciousness. Weren't those walls and bars as cruel to a line having neither word nor reason as they would be for himself if doomed to incarceration with language in his head? Thank you for listening to their inner voices.
Thank you very much, Marcella. How Jonathan Bayliss empathizes with the lions, and actually with quite a few of the beasts. Our next reader is George Angel, who is in the Midwest of America in Michigan, though you wouldn't know it when you see him. George is born in Winchester, Mass., but lived until the age of 12 in Ankara, Turkey. And then he moved back to Sudbury, Mass., and went to Tufts University and graduate school in Davis, California, and the University of Massachusetts, where he completed a Master of Fine Arts in Theater Directing. In 1968 and 70, he staged the world premiere of the rock opera Tommy. George was a longtime friend of Cape Ann choreographer Ina Hahn, with whom he created many works at her iconic Windhover retreat in Rockport, including productions of Peer Gynt, Antigone, and Dogtown. Though through performance at Windhover, he met and became friends with Jonathan Bayliss and came to direct Bayliss's ambitious play about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he did this in Hillsdale, Michigan, where Angel was on the faculty of Hillsdale College. But now he's retired from full-time teaching, though he continues to teach part-time, generally seminars in playwriting. George, please join us and carry on with the elephants.
Thank you, Liz. This passage about elephants is from Prologos, page 166. The Chapman family is visiting the San Francisco Zoo. Jonathan is the oldest boy of the Chapman family, Michael the father. They were Indians, these elephants, gratuitously chained apart from each other by the foot, small-eared, sad, and intellectual, reasonable with man, not wont to flap histrionically like Africans, very, very slow to mate with Americans about. This is the kind Mowgli rode, said Jonathan. They can walk very softly and run very fast. They're wiser than human fathers, he added archly. Maybe, thought Michael, but their tusks were gone, and their mouths hung flabby, and they apparently had nothing left to talk about. The trustees had made life more pleasant for them than the slavery of stacking teakwood in jungle clearings, where their shame might be seen and remembered by those who could appreciate the extent of their humiliation. As prisoners, or as viziers, unlike the Jews, they made no attempt to preserve their literature. Their noses were too long for assimilation, which, doubtless, they had attempted at one time or another for the sake of the children. When one of the lady elephants divined that there had come among the crowd a soul who understood their condition, and searched nearsightedly the row of heads lining the bars. It was the thin, pale face of Jonathan that she picked out. She moved to either limit of her span cell and touched with her trunk the trunks of her fellows on both sides, who each turned to look at the boy. A solemn maneuver for a short glance, and then all three moved as far from him as possible, coming to a stand with their tails towards the chaplain. Arch foes of dragons, prime ministers to philosophic kings. But these milksops would trumpet at the sight of a worm on their pavement. "Oh, why do they have to take their tusks out?" complained Jonathan in querulous disgust. "Let's go. This is no good." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodness, that's kind of a weighty reading, but it's interesting how the son idealized the elephants. But Michael, the father, he was much more realistic. The next three passages are from Bayliss's Gloucester books, read by Jeff Gardner, Kevin Taylor, and Martha Oakes. Caleb Carsus is a central character in these books, as is his dog, Ibby. Our next reader is Jeff Gardner, out in the West Coast, in the Bay Area. Jeff lives in San Francisco, coaches high school distance runners, and manages the editorial and production team in the training department at VMware. He received his PhD from the University of Iowa, completed his dissertation on Charles Olson under the guidance of Sherman Paul. He has written and presented numerous talks and papers on Olson's work, the most recent being the essay, Olson's Poetics and Pedagogy, Influences on Black Mountain College, published in Staying Open, Charles Olson's Sources and Influences. He's presented talks at the Reviewing Black Mountain College conferences, including A Poetics of Primary Materials, From Bauhaus to Black Mountain, From the Alberses to Olson. Jeff has taught Olson's Poetics at the Ruth Asawa School of the Arts in San Francisco, his hometown, where he attended classes taught by Robert Duncan at New College. So he is certainly an Olson authority. Jeff, please join us and take it away with the dogs.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. First, briefly, before I read the passage, I just want to say a few things about Caleb's dog, Ibby Roy. Ibby is a Viking shepherd, a breed that was almost made extinct due to an effort, as Bayliss writes, by English colonists to extirpate these sheep-killing wolves. That's in Gloucester book. However, they were preserved by the efforts of the Viking Shepherd Society. The word Ibby itself is a non-canonical Latin term. It's a personal pronoun, a fourth pronoun, because he, she, and it were not considered sufficient to describe place, and Roy is Latin for king. So in effect, the dog's name means king of the place, and there are a number of passages in the novel that indicate that Ibby, not his owner Caleb, is in fact the king of their place. In the passage I'm about to read from Gloucester book, pages 19 to 20, Caleb has been on a business trip to New York City with a businessman, Rafe Opsimath, and Father Lucy. They are coming home by car, and Caleb is being dropped off at his residence, which is located on a busy Cod Street. On busy Cod Street. In Bayliss's novels, cars are called Kilroys. This passage is the description by Rafe of Caleb being greeted by Ibby. On our return to his tall white house next to the cemetery near the railroad station, I was witness to the fact that his covert love for Ibby Roy was as vulnerable as the Ibby's overt love for him. Caleb had left Ibby in care of Gloria Keith, the landlady, of whose family it seems the dog is well beloved. I sometimes help her out with rubbish and things like that when Dexter's away, Caleb told me, blushing. She likes dogs. I would have been glad to catch another glimpse of Gloria when we paused there on the opposite side of Cod Street, just before dark on a fine evening, but none of the Keiths were to be seen. The noble animal lay on grass above the sidewalk with his nose on his paws as he inspected the whizzing traffic with sadly swiveled eyes, favoring the cars into town from off the Massachusetts Ferry. But he'd been watching long and his hope was low. At first, distracted by a spate of decoys, he didn't notice that our car slowing down across the street was the one that had taken Caleb away. But all at once, he raised his head like a chief, displaying the broad mane of his chest, his pointed ears directed like radar antennas at what suddenly seemed to be just what he'd been looking for in all his spare time for 2 long nights and days. Yet he'd been fooled before by the parking of power cages, and for a moment he made no motion. When the expected one started across the street, a figure movements looked familiar. He stood up, cautious interrogation, and I glimpsed what a handsome dog he was, not gigantic like an Irish wolfhound, but greater than a wolf, perfectly suiting his name, but quite unconscious of the phenomenal contrast he made to his scrawny, unprepossessing master, who, as we were approaching, had joyfully pointed out to us, "There's my Ibby." But as soon as we slowed to a stop, he cried out, "Oh my God," in a rising voice of alarm, and scrambled out of the car in the street before it had come to a stop. The dog's tail was waving hard. "No," Caleb screamed, dropping one of his bags and raising his right palm toward the dog, still hesitating across the street. No, stay where you are." There had been a lull in the traffic, but now Kilroys from both directions were entering the broad reach in front of the house. Just as the dog bounded toward Caleb, a comet of joy, mindless of command, heedless of safety, Father Lucy gunned the black Nicolette broadside into the middle of the thoroughfare, curving leftward as if to make a 180-degree turn in the face of dual onslaught. Hardly across the center line, however, he swerved back to the right lane and dropped to proper speed. The feint was effective. It slowed down the 2 oppositely approaching trailer trucks in high gear that were about to pass each other in front of the house. In 2 seconds, Caleb was safely reunited with the ecstatic prince, who whirled and surged around him on the Keith lawn like a fusca swirl of waves at Eddystone Light. As we dipped out of sight to cross the tracks, Ibby Roy was racing around the front yard in curlicues of joy, bowing to his man at every turn, teasing and laughing and weeping like a foolish puppy relieved of all anxiety. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Well, that was rather dramatic. I guess the father was a very crack race car driver to do such a maneuver. Our next reader is Kevin Taylor across the Atlantic Ocean in England. Kevin is on the board of Cambridge University Press, where he's worked as an academic educational publisher for 36 years, including 10 years as English literature editor. He has written extensively on aspects of publishing, intellectual property, and copyright. He is the author of a best-selling guidebook to Cambridge, UK, not our Cambridge, and is editor of the Powys Journal. Kevin, please join us and carry on with the crows.
Thank you, Liz. My reading, as you say, references crows, those most literary of birds. This from an English poet of renown, for example. But my Bayliss reading is from chapter 11, The Princess Tower of Gloucestertide, page 148. Caleb Carsist and Lillian Cloud are meeting clandestinely in the beautiful park-like Mount Olive Cemetery, based on the real Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Caleb is infatuated with Lillian, but she is committed to another man. JB's use of the capitalized word natural refers to Lillian's American Indian ancestry. Here comes the reading. But as far as judgment was concerned, he it was who never faltered in his conviction that her tastes were amazingly like his own. "You could have been my sister," he said. "I am your sister," she replied. "That's how we're going to solve the problem, by reducing it to incest." Just then, Caleb's exorbiting excitement was checked by one of nature's pleasant phenomena, the hoarse outburst of a crow patrol alighting in some pines that arose from the steep bank below the tower. Until then, with all too many sights and scents clamoring for a consciousness otherwise intent upon its closest desire, the twitterings and uncoordinated calls of Mount Olive's extraordinary aviary had been lost upon him. But this natural woman had taught him to pay almost as much attention to the raven family as to the canine. He turned to look, as she, already watching the birds, took up the interruption. Is it true that in the Czech language, Kafka means crow? It sounds too good to be true. The crow was pure white, Apollo's faithful spy, until turned black as punishment. What was his offense against sweetness and light? He brought the news that Coronis, which also means crow, already pregnant with the god's son Asclepius, had betrayed him with a mortal. So much for the analogical model of your logic. You see, I've always been more of a black moon crow than an ugly duckling. You can't imagine how I had to fight the priest to make him baptize my bastard. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was rather a mysterious ending. So, find out more when reading Bayliss's book, Gloucester Tide. It goes on about this convoluted plot. Anyway, our last reader is Martha Oakes, right here in Gloucester. Martha has served as curator of the Cape Ann Museum for 22 years, from 1981 to 90, and from 2007 to the present. She's also served as director of the Sargent House Museum in Gloucester. She holds a BA from Colby College and an MA in American and New England Studies from Boston University. When she's not at work, she enjoys spending time with her children and grandchildren and keeping her cats safe from area coyotes. Martha, please join us and read about the cats.
Thank you, Liz. My reading is from Gloucester, Mass, beginning on page 279, and it's a conversation between Faye Gabriel, an elderly professor living alone, and her elderly lover, Finn McDane, ex-Navy man. And they're talking about the recent death of Faye's outdoor cat, Felicity. Faye, my family almost always had cats. We usually took one or two with us when we moved, but I've never before lived alone with one, and children long gone. That's a much more intimate situation. It makes you examine the details of symbiosis that you'd taken for granted. Where's the line between extremely gratified affection and human love? Is it only at the proportional difference between the length of time one grieves for a cat and the length of kinship mourning? Finn. I had to part with my short-lived wolfhound when I went away to college in the Navy. His name was Cutchewin. I don't remember our cats. Faye. I never wore long fur. She never took hers off. But she spent the first part of most nights purring in my armpit. I still find myself starting to stoop to fill her water dish at the beginning of dinner routine. And sometimes still seems missing if I don't, and something still seems missing if I don't have to feed her twice a day. I didn't realize how trained I was to her service. I still feel the presence of her absence. But I know that soon I'll be living a totally introverted life again, totally forgetting my effort to imagine her pain at sudden death, remembering the pleasure she gave me by accepting the luxury of my room and board, and how readily she purred and kneaded blanket or pillow with exquisite pleasure, as audibly and rhythmically as an 8-day clock, but forgetting how shamelessly, twice a day, in perfectly dignified regal beast, fit for a scutcheon, demanded service, zigzagging underfoot, leading me in the kitchen with her streaming banner of a tail, yet with the piercing squeaks of a dying banshee, unlike any supplicating mew or like an angrily chirping ghost in the inferno, so unpleasantly distracting my unfocused thoughts from what I was supposed to be doing in my menial routine that I sometimes ended up yelling at her to shut up. That unladylike behavior on my part, a breach of her trust in my servile responsibility, would shock her into 5 minutes of silence. But she always forgave me without a grudge the instant she got her dish. Finn. Even if it was only a case of kitchen cat, cupboard love, you can be sure your Felicity trusted you. You never betrayed her like a milkmaid bringing up her own beef calf. It's the slaughterhouses that perpetuate absolute human treachery. The systematic death is said to be quick and humane, but feeding and killing is harder on my soul than hunting and killing in the wild, even with agonizing spear or arrow. That is, at least, is nearer to the screams of natural predation. Don't blame yourself for granting her the odds of free will that all healthy cats want. If she'd belonged to someone else, she might have pined away in frustration, watching her own natural prey from inside the glass, or else lost her senses in malignant obesity. She preferred the risks of liberty to the confinement of boredom and safety. Faye, I need that cold comfort. I gave her everything she wanted except fancy foods, but after testing my discipline, she contentedly reconciled herself to a healthy diet with only occasional fish. I turned a blind eye to whatever she might have tasted on her own initiative elsewhere. Here, indoors, she knew many ways to make herself comfortable, complacent enough to be worshipped for grace and beauty. That's the only thing that ever softened me to the cruel Egyptians. I've read that in case of fire, their cats were the first to be saved. When one died, the whole household went into mourning. No wonder the cats of their royalty and the priesthood were honored with mummification. Muhammad once cut the sleeve off his robe rather than disturb the sleep of his cat, and God knows I took great pains to avoid disturbing Felicity when I slipped in or out of bed. Yet she herself had no compunction about suddenly breaking off ecstatic relations without warning or apology, just to sit on the floor and nonchalantly wash her face. By the same token, she wasn't in the least bit surprised by the sudden interruptions of her felicity. She'd simply leap to the floor and go about her business as if nothing ever took her off guard. Her nerves and muscles were always as instantly reflexive as the self-supporting leopards in tiger territory. She didn't even blink when I suddenly turned on the electric light at night, as if photons were no faster than the Earth's rotation at dawn. Except when food was concerned, irregularities never seemed to bother her. Finn, your sympathy is more proprioceptive than empirical. Faye, oh Finny, you are too intuitive for a technical man. None of the Felice Sevius Catus individuals, ancient or modern, sanctified or not, were as beautiful or more affectionate than my Felicity. Maybe it wasn't true love, but it was more sensuous than commonplace cupboard love. At her leisure between meals, she loved me for my hands. Food was just the daily animal right that happened to me my human duty, but she deeply appreciated as supererogatory my daily curry of coat, ruff, and tail with her personal comb, which she came begging for if I forgot it. She never smiled, but she had a deadpan sense of humor. She would probe household crevices for amusement and move my rugs around for fun. And you should have seen her playing field hockey with a golf ball on my dining room floor. I collected lost balls from the roadside around the links. Oh, and tennis balls. I'd roll them in a saucer of catnip and she'd hug them to her belly as she writhed in ecstasy, and you could hear her purring all across the room. Finn, it sounds like an empathetic friendship. Faye, yes, 3 days after giving up hope, I couldn't help feeling relieved of inconvenient duties and anxieties. Things I no longer have to consider, surfaces I don't have to keep clean or keep clear of with my feet, habits I no longer need. And my inclination to accept out-of-town invitations is no longer complicated by anyone but my own convenience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. That was rather a poignant reading. Cats are quite amazing aesthetic animals. I hadn't realized. Wow. This is the end of the Bayliss Bestiary readings for this year. There are lots more insights about animals and human lives too in Jonathan Bayliss's extensive and intensive writings. The books of his Gloucesterman series are well worth exploring for all sorts of insights. Now, I'd like to remind everyone about tomorrow's event, the Gloucester Quintet, 5 writers, 5 friends, Anastas, Bayliss, Farini, Lansing, and Olson. All of the readers are friends and family of these writers. A remarkable moment in time starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Saturday, September 12th. And I'd like to extend many thanks to our sponsors, the Cape Ann Museum, Gloucester Writers Center, and the Jonathan Bayliss Society. And to all of our great readers for bringing a Bayliss Bestiary to life. Well, we do have time for some questions, but it seems like with the 48 participants present, no one has yet asked a question. So I might ask one just with words, not typing it out. And it's something that was just occurring to me as Martha spoke, and also seeing the pictures that were presented at the beginning of Jonathan Bayliss and his animals. And I had not realized that cats had figured so strongly in his life. And the writings that Martha read were really, could only be written by someone who observed very closely and empathetically with these animals. So I would like to ask Catherine, if you don't mind, what would did your father have cats most of his life, or on and off, or just a little summary of his history with cats, because I'm more familiar with the dog side. If you please, Catherine.
Well, what I remember mostly is the more recent cats, probably in the last 10 or 15 years of his life. We went down to the Cape Ann Animal Shelter to pick a cat, and he loved black female cats. I can't remember the order they were in, but this relates a little bit to Martha's reading. The first 1 or 2 cats we got in this last decade were tragically killed because he did not to. Something happened to my speaker. So the last years of my father's life, he had several cats which were adopted at the local cat orphanage. And the first 2 tragically died. I think one was from a coyote or other animal, and another was from an automobile. The speculation, because he never knew for sure. So after several of these cats died, he finally decided to keep the last cat indoors. And the last cat did actually survive him and live for several years afterwards. But my father grew up with cats. He and his family loved both cats and dogs. And during my childhood, we always had cats. One was named Also, and one was named Furbelow. And I had a cat that I couldn't take to an apartment I was living in, so he took that cat. So yes, I think, oh, and for Christmas for several years, he gave me books on cats, which I've never read, but he wanted me to become not only a cat lover, but an erudite cat lover. So that's what I could remember.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That I may even remember Furbelow from way long ago. It's a lovely name. Oh, well, there doesn't seem to be any other questions. Do any of the other panelists have any questions about something they may have read or anything they're curious about.
I love the idea of a literary man having a cat called Also. When calling that cat, you must always have wondered what was coming next.
Oh, and I forgot, another cat was named Et Tu. I think maybe Et Tu preceded Also.
That would figure.
So Jonathan was very consistent, not only in his writings, but in his namings of the creatures that he loved. So it's, I don't know, I think, well, I mean, I suppose I shouldn't say, but I have been, you know, I am a friend of the family, but I didn't know so much about Jonathan's writings as I have been learning this year. So I feel honored to be asked to participate here, and I've learned a lot more. So it's just, you know, it's a privilege. And I wonder, since there's no questions and we're still before the time, so George, could I ask you a question, George, about when you did the theatrical production of Gilgamesh? It looked like you were using the college students as actors there. How was it directing that? Because it's such a, well, kind of intellectual exercise as well as theatrical.
It was a pretty strongly intellectual exercise all the way around. Jonathan and I had talked about the play for a long time as he was working on it. And I saw it in several iterations as it gradually grew. And I knew how much he wanted to see how some of it would work on stage. But the way he had written it as a play for dancers was difficult, and it was a huge play, gigantic theatrical undertaking, and very unlikely as something that would be approached professionally. So I was running the theater department at this little college out in Michigan, and I took on the task of trying to put something together so he could hear it and see it, and see what people would do with the start that he gave us. At the time, now we're a department of theater and dance, but at the time we were just a department of theater, and we had really no dance component, and it was difficult to get the dance done. But I had students with some training who did some choreography, and of course with Ina Han, I had done a whole lot of dance theater stuff jointly. So the collaboration was fun. And I was experimenting with sort of the early days of computer music. So I wrote music for the piece, just so there would be something to go with it. And Jonathan came out and saw the show, and I think he was quite delighted with it, just having a chance to see some of it up on its feet. And the students worked their little behinds off. I thought they were great. It was tough material, and it was way outside their small wheelhouses at the time, but they came forward with it.
That's great. It sounds, George, like you had a wonderful team out there. So you must have been a great, like, director yourself to get everybody inspired and contributing. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. I think you can see it on YouTube, actually. I think that it's lousy video because that was before HD or anything like that. But you
Right.
can get some sense of what was done with the whole thing.
So people should just Google like Gilgamesh play or something like
Yes,
that.
yeah. Actually, probably Catherine can tell you exactly what the address is, because
Well, we have two questions that have come in. So from our audience here, and I guess they're simultaneously came in. And Jennifer is, how did your readers come to become engaged with Bayliss? And I guess that would be a question for all of our readers who are present. Shall we start with, let me see, let's start with Jeff. Is that all right, Jeff? How did you come to be engaged with Jonathan's works?
Well, that's actually, I was at an American Literature Association annual conference in Boston, and there was a table there of Jonathan's novels, and I started looking at them and reading bits and parts of it, and knew about a little bit about the relationship with Olson. And then Gary Reeve Carlson back in January said that Catherine was looking for someone to host the Bayliss panel at the ALA conference in San Diego in May, which of course didn't happen because of the virus. And we talked on the phone for a bit in January. She got me interested, and then very generously she started sending me copies of her dad's books, and that's how I started reading them. Although I did tell her there is a reason why my background is mostly in poetry. I have a limited attention span. So I'm not sure I'll ever make it all the way through any of the novels, but I pick it up and read parts and enjoy them very much. And I found the dog passages just hysterical, and there are quite a few more that are very interesting. And one of the questions to me was, did I think that Bayliss was canonifying of Olson in the form of Ibby Roy? So I don't quite think so, but since I don't know enough about their relationship, that's a possibility. I'll have to consider it and probably do some more reading.
Thank you
But
very.
I do. I mean, it's very. I mean, intellectually, these are extremely interesting novels, and the whole Gilgamesh part is also quite fascinating to me, because that's one of the texts that I taught when I was teaching as a grad student in Iowa, and really coming out of Olson's interest in Gilgamesh. And so it's very interesting for me to see that Bayliss was working the Gilgamesh side of things as well.
Thank you, Jeff. That you're really tying so much together. I mean, because of Olson and Bayliss being friends, and then the Gilgamesh play. Gilgamesh was something Olson was also fascinated with. So it's like, well, tomorrow's program should be really engaging to hear how everybody interacted and worked together. So there's one other, I'd like to ask also this same question about how you came to be engaged with Bayliss's writings to Kevin, since he is from the other side of the ocean. Kevin, would you like to describe how you first heard about Jonathan's writings?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Liz. You heard a couple of references in the introductions to an English novelist called John Cooper Powys, who was actually a couple of generations earlier than Jonathan Bayliss, born 1873, died 1963. But he was very much also a novelist of place. He wrote a Wessex tetralogy of novels, which are very much rooted in that part of southwestern England, just as Jonathan's tetralogy is rooted on the coast of Massachusetts. And so there are strong parallels and analogies between those two writers. And I met Catherine when she attended a Poets Society conference, I think 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't it, Catherine? In Glastonbury in Somerset, England, which is one of the places that he writes about. And through Catherine, I developed a slight knowledge of Bayliss's work. She was kind enough to send me a pack of the novels, which I cannot say I've yet read in detail, but look forward to getting down to after these sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Yes, that's interesting, the parallels between Powys and Bayliss. So yeah, it's great when a writer can just kind of go deep into where he or she is. And well, there are really some amazing kind of observations that Jonathan has. And it's true, though, dipping in is fun too. Now, I wonder if, now, Marcella, you were a recent person who's come to Jonathan Bayliss. Can you describe how that happened, please?
Yes, thank you. Well, it happened in much the same way as Kevin Taylor, because I also belong to the Poets Society, and mostly interested in the John Cooper poets, because there are three brothers. And I didn't actually get to know Catherine very much the previous times she attended the conferences, but last year in Cambridge, England, we had dinner together, just the two of us. And you know how when you don't know somebody very well, virtually at all, you actually get to say much more than you would. And so we told each other life stories, and she told me about her father. And then, as with Kevin, she sent me a prologus and etc. And kindly invited me to join today. But as Kevin, I've not that the sense of place, of course, is very important, but also the empathy, the way Jonathan Bayliss really gets into the animals, under the animal's skin, and gets our animal side to coincide and understand. There's a lot about all that in John Cooper Paris's books. Also, the way you, what's it, the ictus, he calls it the ichthyosaurus leap. It's this a fish. I mean, a prehistoric fish, you know. So it's the prehistoric fish in us that kind of leaps and understands the philosophy of life, of even of animals. We're there, where we're connecting, and it's also spiritual, but it's also just obviously called stupid. It's just you know, when an animal like a lizard is just happy, basking in the sun, just absorbing nature. And I think we really have a connection between these two authors. And I have a question from Catherine, if I may. Is did your father, did Jonathan Bayliss actually, I mean, he writes beautifully about, he really understands animals from the inside. Did he writes about them, but did he express this? Did he actually, in conversation, would he actually talk about his understanding of animals and nature? For Catherine.
Yeah, I just got unmuted. I don't remember any specific discussions, but animals, cats and dogs were just part of our life, and the love he felt for his pets was obvious. And as I said earlier, he gave me several books about dogs and cats and wanted me to get interested in the various species, but I don't remember any philosophical talk. Fathers often don't talk to their children that way. I would say most of his emotions went into his writing in written word rather than oral speech.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kathy and Marcella. Those are beautiful insights, Marcella. And yes, often when our lizard brains are working, we feel so content. and I just one other panelist I would like to ask the same question would be Martha. I mean, Martha, of course, being at the Cape Ann Museum, I'm sure you would have even known Jonathan in person. How did you become engaged with the program?
Well, I became engaged with the program through Catherine, who is a superb organizer and gets everyone on board when there's an important project. But working here at the Cape Ann Museum, which is a museum that's all about place, I did have the privilege to know Jonathan, also Peter Anastas, who's featured tomorrow, and Vincent Farini. And although this museum is best known for its art collection, we have a very strong archival collection, and it includes several of Charles Olson's letters, which we're very proud to have here, including his scream to the editor of the Gloucester Times. We have just about all of Vincent Farini's collection within our archives, and all of Peter Anastas's collection, which he gave us shortly before he died last year. And also a few things by Garrett Lansing. So we're just in touch with what's going on in the literature world here on Cape Ann, and very pleased to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Martha. It's wonderful how the Cape Ann Museum and Writers Center and Bayliss Society have all come together to create this great event. And we are now almost to 3 o'clock. So I think Jennifer just said, she just gives a last note saying, thank you, Marcella, for asking Catherine your question. Thanks to all the readers, and I'm sure she speaks for all the participants who came. So that, which was 47, as I understand. So this has been a wonderful event. And remember, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, to come and learn more about all the writers that Martha was just telling us about. So thank you so much. And one more, Paul McGeary. He says, it seems to me that Jonathan's focus on dromonology, oh my goodness, I think that's the science of ritual, but I could be wrong. Dromonology as pre-literate, even pre-vocal expression of humanity's beginnings, going back to our earliest evolutionary steps toward a culture. As such, it would have a strong animal origin. Well, any ideas? Asked Paul. I think, Paul, it's a great theory. I will now mute and anyone can speak up. I think everyone can just absorb what Paul said as yes. There's an animal origin to most of our human endeavors, especially the ones that, yes, rituals like dance and all kinds of ceremonies, and Jonathan was fascinated. Jeff, did you want to say something?
Well, I think probably that's a pretty complicated question, but I think probably Bayliss and Olson shared interests in Jane Harrison and her work and what she wrote about Dromonon. And Olson gave lectures back in the early 50s really on, on what cave rituals and the connection of ritual painting, use of the hand gestures and vocal, vocalizing that and oral literature, basically storytelling. So they're probably, yes, I think there's probably a lot that could be done there, far more than could be said in the next couple of minutes here on this call. But it's a really great, complicated question, but I'm sure that Bayliss and Olson talked about this. I'm sure they would have.
Well, you would know, Jeff, more than anyone. Yes. Well, that's for another conference, perhaps next year. Very deep subject. Well, now it's 3:01, so I think we are now done, and many thanks to all the people, especially Catherine, who put it all together, and then all our readers. Mark has now left, but here are Martha, Kevin, Marcella, and George, and as well you, Jeff. Thank you. That is really wonderful that you all came. So I guess I'll do the leave business down here in the bottom corner.